Hello and welcome back to the Earth Sea Love podcast. I come to you today on location again. I find myself in Glasgow at the COP26 Coalition People's Summit for Climate Justice. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Earth Sea Love podcast. This podcast is for and about women of colour and our relationship with nature. Hosted by me, Sheree Mack. The Earth Sea Love podcast is committed to exploring the experiences of women of colour with Mother Nature. We want to provide spaces where the hidden voices in the environmental and conservation conversations can explore their relationship with the natural world. Inspired by our time spent outdoors, we amplify the voices of women of colour, our stories, our conversations, interviews, photography, writing, and artwork. We'll be exploring our legacies, histories, and memories which have had an influence and effect upon how we perceive ourselves within the natural world and within the environmental and climate justice movements. Welcome to the Earth Sea Love podcast. The Earth Sea Love podcast has been made possible by the funding from National Lottery Heritage Fund. Thank you. Glasgow at the COP26 Coalition People's Summit for Climate Justice. This has been over 150 events and sessions in Glasgow and online, which have brought together people, groups and organisations from around the world who are fighting and organising for systematic change. Our current political and economic systems are built on inequality and injustice, racism and colonialism, and these are at the root of the current climate crisis. It's brought us to this point now. And while COP26, the UN climate talks, take place over the way from the People's Summit for Climate Justice, those governments, those people that are in there at COP26, usually white men, that are in that room, they're making decisions about our futures without really listening to us and really listening to the people most affected by this climate emergency. So these people who are on the front lines, who are experiencing climate crisis, are here. That's why this People's Summit for Climate Justice is so important, because their voices are being centred here at this People's Summit for Climate Justice, and they're being centred and they're being heard as they demand for change. And what's been so refreshing for the events that I've been to so far is that Black, brown and Indigenous women are taking centre stage, and their voices are being heard by a majority white audience. But I'll talk about that in another episode, because today I bring you another special commissioned episode in conjunction with Northumberland's National Park Future Landscapes Festival, and this episode is with the lovely and inspiring Claire Ratinon, who's an organic food grower and a writer based in East Sussex. She's got this book out that's called How to Grow Your Dinner Without Leaving the House. Claire's a plant lover and a food lover, and this is such an apt episode to bring you after I recently sat in on a panel discussion about seed sovereignty and how my mind has just been expanded about the importance of seed diversity and seed resilience in a world where agriculture is dominated by big corporate organizations with government backing who are more interested in profit and controlling our growing and buying choices rather than having a secure and resilient food system working in harmony with nature to both serve people and the planet. And we need the conditions for far more diverse seed system to thrive. Otherwise, we as a population, we're going to perish, and we're going to take the planet with us if we don't start to adopt a more agroecological seed growing mentality, seed sowing mentality throughout the world. So this episode with Claire, who came to plants later in life, who is now devoting her time and energies to get more people growing their own produce organically, and for more people to take back that control of knowing where our food comes from and what's gone into producing it, because that is power. That's where the power would be lying. And as I said, Claire's an organic food grower, and this talk is such a delightful talk because we're getting a history, we're getting a migration, we're getting a colonialism, and we even get into discussion of the necessity of bringing a decolonized lens to the practice of horticulture. Enough from me. Let's get into this episode, and I hope you enjoy, and thanks for coming back and listening. Bye for now. Welcome, Claire. Thank you for being part of the Earth Sea Love podcast. And these are a special mini series of commissioned episodes that are looking at particular issues around climate justice, racial justice, land justice, and trying to shift the narrative in terms of who has a voice or who has a right to have a voice within the environmental conservation movements. So good to have you with us, Claire. The first thing I ask is, how are you and where you're calling in from? And can you see any nature where you are calling?
Right. A three-part question.
Yeah.
I'm all right. I am, if in all honesty, I'm quite burnt out, and I'm coming towards the end of a period of like quite intense work, and hoping that the winter will be what winter ought to be, which is a necessary quietening. So I am coming to you directly from a very, very exhausted brain and body. But I'm in East Sussex, which I've been living here for about 2 years, but before that I was in London. And from where I'm sitting, I'm really fortunate that I have set my desk up so that I look over my garden, which then leads onto a beautiful field full of ancient trees. So I'm very, very fortunate. And then in my garden, I can see my chickens pecking around when the wind isn't sort of blowing their knickers around. They get very upset when that happens. It's been quite stormy. It's been a really stormy night last night. And so it's still a little bit blowy out there. So their feathers are getting ruffled. So I'm just watching them to make sure they're okay. They seem a little bit distressed.
Oh, wow. You've got chickens.
You have chickens.
And they have ruffled feathers. I'm just loving that.
They're real fancy birds. They're really fancy. They're called Pekin bantams, and they've got like big fluffy legs and a really fluffy tail. So when the wind blows, it all kind of gets rattled, and so they find that all a bit upsetting, a bit rude, and so they'll sort of run and hide underneath something. They seem okay right now, though.
Yeah. No, I can definitely, we are kin. We are one with nature and wildlife, etc. And like when you're saying getting your feathers ruffled, I can appreciate that, man.
Absolutely.
Outside forces or elements that are coming to ruffle us. It's like, I don't like it myself. So I feel it for the chickens. I do. So thank you.
I mean, I feel sorry for them being out there, honestly, but that's the life of a chicken. If they were inside the house, they'd just be filling it full of poo and feathers. So in fact, it's they have to live in their own house. In fact, actually, I can see them all going inside now because
it's a payoff with the shit on the feathers in the house. Yeah, to get your feathers ruffled outside. Anyhow, I can go off on these tangents, but where I see these conversations as a selfish thing, really, because I love to talk to people, but especially people that I admire or come on my radar as doing great stuff within the environment and nature and horticulture, which is your bag. But I'm not going to tell others what your bag is. I like the individual themselves to describe it themselves. It's like, okay, we could say, what do you do or what do you get up to? But I like to say, is like, what do you be? Because we're always marked by what we do or produce, and I think we actually be what we do in a sense. So what you be?
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Who am I guess. And I'm a plants person. I'm a plants person who found their way towards plants kind of not late in life. I'm not. I mean, but after I had a career previous to finding my way to plants, and so I'm I had an entire life, entire career, and then I found my way to the earth and to the soil, and so now I am a plants person. And it's funny because I know that we often use the word horticulture. I end up using the word horticulture, but my principal interest is growing food, and that's really what ignites me. And I'm a food grower first and foremost. So when I'm sticking my nose in and having opinions about horticulture, it is somewhat from the position of an outsider in a willful way, an intentional way. I'm kind of, I think I'm interestingly positioned adjacent to the horticultural world, but not within it. And so so I can critique it in a very certain way, or I can analyze it in a very certain way, but I'm not an insider. So there's definitely things that I'm not party to. But so that's why I would describe myself as a plant person more so than like a gardener or a horticulturist or a food grower. Yeah, food is my bag. Food is my everything. And when I started out on this journey, it was food that kind of growing food that was that captured my imagination and hasn't sort of let go yet. And even though I have a garden of my own, and it is full of ornamental plants, but growing food is where I will always put the most effort and where I'll always end up, I think.
Oh, I love that. I'm glad that you have you defined yourself, or you put your own labels on you. And I so like, you're saying a plant lover, and it's food which is a source, and to be able to grow your own food is a power. You do have not just a stake in the land, but a stake in how you live your life, basically. And I think that's so empowering. But that idea of being an outsider to the horticultural sort of like scene and running adjacent to it, there's power in that position as well. Because I definitely think so. So to just elaborate on that a little bit, if you could, that outsider experience or influence, but then also, why do you say you were late coming to being a plant lover? And did something major happen in your life for you to become a plant lover? Because I know my relationship with nature came about after traumatic experiences, and it was being with nature that actually healed me. It's actually healing me, because it's not an end process, man. It's always that. It's always that process of becoming. So those questions I asked you is like, what was it that made you become a plant lover, and that outsider status?
Right. Well, yeah. I did not grow up a feeling, an affinity, a connection to the natural world. That was not part of my upbringing at all. I think I grew up with this very strong story about what sort of success looked like, what achievement looked like, and it was very much like academic, professional. So all the things that are kind of the antithesis of like going and muddying oneself on purpose, I suppose. And I was working as a filmmaker. I was working as a documentary filmmaker and a producer. I actually worked in television first, actually, for 4 years, and then I moved to New York and sort of shuffled over to documentary and independent documentary. And it was there that completely by chance I found my way to a rooftop farm, which was this incredible place called Brooklyn Grange, which is the farm that I found myself chanced upon, was in Queens, which is where I was living, even though it was called Brooklyn Grange. Mm-hmm. And yeah, this 1 acre of land just totally changed my life. It was so implausible. I saw this sign on a door that said there's a rooftop farm, come and visit, and I just thought it didn't seem like a real thing, and I didn't know what to expect at all, and went up this elevator up 8 stories and stepped out onto this like improbable little bit of like kind of bucolic wonderland, and it was so full of divine plants and just like overflowing with abundance. And it was, and you know, I've always been very obsessed with food. That's very much like part of where I put a huge amount of my energy. It's something that is deeply important to my family. It's how we kind of, it's one of our kind of real connective forces. And so I love food, but I'd never really thought about how we grow food. And so, you know, suddenly having this moment of quite literally a light bulb moment, this curtain just fell over this, like away from this whole world that I'd never even thought about or engaged my brain in considering. You know, the relationship I had with food, you know, started at the supermarket and ended on my plate, and there's a whole world before that I had never even considered. And so from that day, I sort of tried my best to go back as often as I could, because I just felt there was this whole thing, this whole universe to discover. And so I spent as much time as I was allowed to there. I was volunteering every weekend, you know, going to work in the week and then spending Saturdays there. And I spent 2 seasons doing that, and then towards the end of my time in New York, spent even more time there because I'd made friends with the kind of farmers and farmhands, and sort of wheedled my way to being able to spend a bit more time in there in the week. And it just really solidified the decision to come back to London, and see whether I could retrain and learn more about growing plants in this way. And so I came back to London and moved back to Hackney, and it was there I started doing more volunteering, and then started doing some training, and trained to grow salad organically with Growing Communities, which is an amazing social enterprise in Stoke Newington. And then, from there, just did whatever I possibly could. I've done all kinds of bonkers jobs in order to be closer to the natural world. I have kept bees, I've grown in schools, I've taught in community centres, I have grown for restaurants and cafes and a veg box scheme. I have done all kinds of things. And that was I think it was about 6 years worth of 5-6 years of growing in London. And then about 2 years ago I moved to East Sussex. And while I don't grow in that kind of like slight that way, I don't grow for others at the moment. I'm doing a lot more talking about and writing about growing food, and encouraging other people to do it, encouraging us to have these conversations that investigate the complexity of the act of working with plants, of working with the earth, of working the land. And so that's where I am right now. That's sort of a whistle stop tour of my plant journey.
I mean, like, you're just speaking my language. I mean,
oh, good.
It's a case of like, you know, it's feeding my soul hearing this. It really is. You know, you've got all that abundance in there, and that idea, what you're saying, is like that curtain fell, and it was like your eyes had been opened to this universe, which had been there all along, but you hadn't tapped into it or realized it. You know, food, supermarket, plate, that sort of thing. And that whole world is like before that, and to get into it, and and feed your soul through the process of doing it. And that you're on this constant journey now. And I just love hearing that, and how, I don't know, it's well, now you're saying that you're not so much growing for others because you're talking and writing about it, plants and food, and how we have this connection, and what we need to know more about it. And you're doing that because you obviously feel it's important to share, your experiences, this knowledge, so other people can get on this tip and like think about where your food's coming from and start growing our own. I get it. So, you've had that training. Question is like, when you were doing this training and now you're doing this talking and this writing, I mean, your face is around. I've seen you in magazines and stuff, you know what I mean? On TV. So your face is around. But like, are you seeing many faces like yours in this I want to say genre or sector, you know what I'm saying? As many people that look like you doing this.
It took me a while to find them, but oh yeah, for sure. Like, Black and brown people grow, they absolutely do. And like, all the conversations that came out of last summer, some of the like more grim and gross responses from the kind of institutions within the sector were, questioned our existence. And it was so depressing, honestly, to hear that, like, oh, are people of color growing? Yeah, of course we are. We have been growing the entire time. And for me, my story is very much about coming back to the earth, and so, I can understand why, if they believe that my story is representative of other Black and brown people, then maybe they would think that there's not a lot of people who are actively growing. But the vast majority of the food that we eat is grown by Black and brown people. And just because in the kind of like very white, very conservative world of horticulture and ornamental gardening, we're not very visible, doesn't mean that we aren't working with plants and know what we're doing. And so I think, that there could be more of us, put it that way. I think there's a lot of people who were probably in the position that I was in when I found my way back to the earth, who carried, very weighty stories about what our kind of duty is as, the children of immigrants, or the children of, the diaspora, like what our duty is to our parents and our grandparents and our families is it often centers around status and kind of not wealth per se, but maybe just like comfort and safety. And so I think there's a lot of people who like me for the longest time didn't recognize that there was something they might be missing. Well, at least I can only really speak for myself, but I was so deeply, I was wounded and like aching for something, and I couldn't find it, and I was trying to fill it with all manner of things, and a lot of my kind of professional pursuits were looking for affirmation in a place that was empty of it. It could never really give me that sense of like homecoming and belonging and like a heart opening that the work of growing plants has been able to give to me. So I think there's a lot of people who I hope to coax into not necessarily even doing this as work. I'm happy to devote my entire being to it, but even if it's something that you just participate in, in your own space, or as a part of a community garden, or as a volunteer, or if that's feasible for you. You're right that I've ended up somewhere where talking and sharing and writing about it is the kind of overall objective, is to coax people who think that this space isn't for them to reconsider that, and then through that maybe even investigate what they might have lost by believing that story, because I believed that story for a really long time, and it kept me away from a lot of that, the healing that you spoke about earlier, that kind of process of kind of weaving myself together. And that's a lot of that is connected to having a sense that my ancestry and its connection and its relationship to land doesn't have to only hold trauma and trouble, and that that actually the trauma and trouble can be healed by reweaving myself into a sense of like really defiant ancestry and really resilient and powerful ancestry, and that is connected to land, and reclaiming the right to work the land and the right to work with plants and the right to feel like you are part of the natural world and not trying to transcend it or disconnect yourself from it as a, you know, that's, yeah, I'm rambling.
No, you're not rambling. I'm saying, you know, people can't see me, but I'm going, yes, and I'm going, yes, and I'm going like, preach, because this is, you know, it is singing to my soul, because it's a case of like, you know, I've had these experiences, they mirror them. The little details are different, but there's similarities there of, you know, that idea of status and looking for that affirmation and acceptance outside of us, and thinking that through getting those academic jobs and those professions that we're safe and we will be comfortable. And this is something that is drilled in us, because as kids of immigrants, they came here and they did have it difficult. You know, that was their priority, to make a living, to be able to live, and not just, not even thrive, just survive. So we take that, and that's on board with us. But it is a case of not realizing that we are going around with these gaping wounds that are festering, and that we're looking to fill it or heal it by ugliness or other means that really are not there to sustain us. And to come back to the land, as you say, come back to the land. It's like, yes. And that's, you know, as you said, weaving yourself into the land. I love it, because it's a case like, it's almost like, for me, I get evangelical about it, and I'm not religious, I'm a spiritual person. It's like, oh my gosh, it's like, you're missing a tip, people, you know. It's like, get back to the land of me, get in the sea, get back to that point of being whole within yourself. And nature helps us do that. Nature supports us. I fell in love with nature. That meant I fell in love with myself, you know, and to pass that on to others, it's like,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a service. It's a service I don't mind taking up and doing and running with it. But let's talk about that, your writing and the books, because the title of this episode, once it goes out, or what I put in the blurb, is Decolonizing Horticulture. We can change it if we want to say it like growing plants or growing food. But you've got there was a pamphlet that I got, which was horticultural appropriation, the one with Sam Mack. And in there is that mention of decolonizing horticulture. And like, what does it mean to you to say that, you know, to use decolonization? What does that mean? You might have touched upon it, but let's explore it a bit more, because it's such a buzzword at the moment, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? And I have to admit, I kind of ended up, after having submitted our text and images for that piece, for that pamphlet, came across an essay called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, which like totally upended the way in which I was using that word, you know. And it's an amazing essay by Kay Wayne Yang and Eve Tuck. And it basically talks about the idea that decolonization is a very real process, and it's something that it describes how, you know, settler colonialism and the kind of ravages of colonialism can be, you know, the process of restitution and reparations and the process of repatriation, all of those things, giving land back, frankly, to colonized nations. It's a very real thing. And so when we use it in this kind of like slightly like academic, or you know, when we're describing like the dismantling of colonial systems, and we use decolonization in that context, where we stand to dilute it. So I think it always bears saying that actually, you know, for many communities, that word is powerful, and that we need to be careful when we use it. Unfortunately, we don't have an alternative, I think, yet. And so in absence of something more fitting, I think we end up using decolonization, because that is what we are doing to some extent, is that we're looking at the ways in which colonialism has created the kind of the histories, the stories, the structures, the narratives, the language, the actual physical manifestations. If we're talking about the garden, we're talking about, you know, the actual physical manifestations of the plants that are here that we grow. All of that is a product of the colonial project, and those, you know, that doesn't, just because people's belief that colonialism is over, which it isn't, by the way, because people want to believe that, they want to believe that it's no longer relevant and the conversation doesn't need to happen because that's history and it's settled and it's done. And actually, I would argue that it is very much alive and well and is being kind of performed and reperformed in the practices of horticulture and agriculture, of the stories we tell, the language we use, who we uphold, whose knowledge we learn and worship and attribute that knowledge to. You know, all of these things are a byproduct of the colonial system, and so we, I think, especially as practitioners of colour, of horticulturists, gardeners, growers of colour, I think I would be surprised if anyone can participate in the work of growing plants and not feel at least somewhat compelled to investigate the narratives that they are using, parroting, learning, and want to trouble them, honestly, because they're troublesome and they're really, you know, lots of them are really problematic. So what does it mean to me? I think it means a number of things. I think it means an interrogation of and I think this is true of any institution. You can kind of take out horticulture and pretty much put any institution at the end of that sentence. It's an interrogation of our assumptions about things, and being really curious about the things that are normalized, the language that are normalized, the names that are normalized, and all of those things, the institutions that are normalized. There's a whole, you know, a whole operation around horticulture in this country, and particularly that looks like, you know, the formal gardens of manor houses and green, you know, these kind of enormous greenhouses full of tropical plants and flower shows, and, you know, all of these things. And they are, every year, they're kind of just like performed every year over and over again, just the season cycle, and the same thing happens over and over again, and there's no kind of interrogation of why we do it, who set the standards, who create those aesthetic expectations, who decides what's in and what's out, where do these plants come from, why is there no history attached to those plants, why don't we talk about what it took to get us here? Because not only is it necessary, but it's also, frankly, it's interesting. I think it's the only thing that will keep me coming back to learning and learning and learning, because there is so much more to learn than just the way a plant behaves and what it needs and how to grow it so that it performs best at the perfect time of year. And frankly, at a time of climate crisis, it's sort of grotesque and obscene to keep doing things the same way over and over again, and having these kind of manicured lawns that are, you know, drinking up our drinkable, our clean water at a time when the water, you know, a crisis of water is on the horizon, you know, and there's so many crises that are coming for us. And like, we need to talk about also how these expectations, which I would argue are an heirloom of colonial times, are still permeating the landscape of horticulture particularly, but in some ways agriculture too, to this day. And those all need disrupting, because we are in a moment of a really pivotal moment where the climate crisis is not going to happen, it's happening, and we need to all, you know, behave as though that is, it's not impending, that it's happening right now, and we all need to address the way that we behave that perpetuates the systems that are only going to exacerbate that further.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's like so much to unpick there. But I love the language that you use about interrogating and disrupting the norm, the system, and
burn it to the ground.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, you know, because it's really weird, because I'm part of this women's cultural network. Yeah, it's, you know, it's black women, okay, and there's a spectrum of ages and experience in there, and they're talking about creating a feministo. This is what we're doing and this is what we want, and I'm thinking, okay, then that's fine, but also for me that's working within the system and playing by those rules. At the same time of doing that, I also want something that's running parallel where we say fuck the rules, fuck the system, and let's, as you say, burn it all down, and let's start centering us and operating in a way that best serves us and who we serve, thinking outside of the way the system's working or the box it is now. It's like there is another way, there are other ways that we can operate in. And it's to get to that way of thinking, then, because then there can be the action. I totally get that. Yeah. But what you said about a performance going on, because I'm finding when we're saying about decolonization and getting rid of horticulture and putting in any other institution there's people that are in these institutions in position of power who are actually turning towards Black and brown bodies and saying, how can we do this decolonization of whatever that institution is? It's like, all right, then I can understand maybe why you're coming to ask us, but at the same time, you need to be asking yourselves what you can do or what you haven't been doing. And it's almost as if like the responsibility is put on us to do that, all that decolonization, to do this, to just disrupting, even if a case of like, when it's put on us, it's then, okay, if it doesn't work, then we get the blame. It's like we tried, the institution, we tried, but like, they fouled up, we do, it's that performance allyship thing. So do you find that you've been asked to be, you're brought in to do this stuff, or you're consulted, but at the same time, there's that underlining things like, well, we don't really want to be doing anything. We don't want to make.
Oh, yeah.
Of course. And if shit doesn't happen or if it goes wrong, it's like, you're getting the blame. You get actually criticized for it.
Oh, well, I mean, the criticism hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it's coming. Well, there's a lot to unpack in what you've just said there, because, it's. I'm going to paraphrase here because I can't remember who it was who sort of said this the first time, but I see it circulating all the time. The expectation that we have the answers to a problem we didn't create is actually gross. And but then, obviously people like you and I feel it's incumbent on us to also have since we have strong opinions and we have a voice, to use that as best we possibly can. But you're right. I think that I've done talks for various institutions, and I think that when you get invited to do a talk and then they're like, did it, we talked about it, and that's it. And I'm like, so what are you going to do? And it's not necessarily for me to, and almost invariably every time I'm in part of these panel discussions or these talks, someone will ask me a question like, what's a very real way that we can decolonize our gardens? And I'm like, yeah, I feel like you're slightly missing the point, because I cannot give you a bullet point. There is no such thing as a manual as to how to decolonize your garden. But if you are actually paying attention to this entire conversation, what I'm basically saying is the entire structure around, or structures and systems around the way in which we do things, were created by a system that won't allow us to change it in any fundamental way. And so I'm asking you to just bin it all and try and think beyond the structures that you've come to believe are benign and apolitical and are a pre-existing state of things. And so I think literally last night I had a conversation with a botanical garden, and it was actually the kind of a side shoot of this botanical garden. It definitely wasn't it was with a kind of like radical contingent within this botanical garden who are like up for these conversations. But do I think that hours worth of chats going to make it to the kind of upper echelons of power, so they suddenly think, what, all these manicured lawns would be better off as allotments or be better off as small scale farms? What, we have got too much money here and too much wealth, and what we need to do is cede power to those who have been systematically disempowered for such a long time and who don't believe that this place is for them. We need to actually hand it over. We need to hand over a huge amount. Those hierarchies and those enormous salaries, that's where you could start. Like, figure out how you can actually cede power. There is so much power, especially if you're looking at like institutions like a botanical garden. They are looked to as the leaders of thought when it comes to working with plants and ultimately the climate crisis. what they say has a huge impact, and what they do has a huge impact. So if you really want to show that you're actually doing something, dismantle the power structures that uphold your entire organization, and figure out how you can actually invite people in who might have the solutions that we can all move forward together as a community. Because ultimately, we're not, while those structures of power remain in place, we're not in this together, and so the people with the power and the money need to climb down, and the people who own all the land need to just give it to other people who actually will use it, as opposed to just hoard it as an asset.
No, I mean, that's it. It's a simple thing,
You've got power and you've got privilege and you've got wealth. Figure out how to disperse that to people who don't, and who might actually have like the will to make the world actually survivable for the majority of us, not just for the handful of people who have enough money to build a bunker or fly to the moon. Mars. Isn't that where Elon Musk is going?
Seed power.
Seed there.
There's, it's that playing with language, but that is the fundamental thing, the foundation of it all. You mentioned reparations and, COP26, and there's a number of initiatives and projects that are using that as a vehicle to actually say these very things about, it's like dismantling the system and giving like hard examples and ideas of what you should be doing. And you just saying there's like stuff you mowed, Lord, let's turn them into allotments. It's like simple, man, easy as it is.
No, I mean, there's also people, I think when it comes to I know that people find the reparations conversation really contentious, and I am not an academic of reparations, so for me, I don't necessarily feel the need to like get into the weeds and figure out how to perfectly do it. I just know it needs to be done, and I just think that like when you start pulling the threads of these kind of decolonial conversations, that is where it ends up. Reparations, and restitution and repatriation, that's where it ends up, and it's where it ought to end up, because that's the only way that we can create equity and justice within a very, very unequal and unjust world. And there's a huge amount of inequality and injustice that was foundational to that colonial project that persists to this day, and it is not even that hard to find the evidence for it. There's a huge campaign for the Drax family, the Drax, who had plantations in Barbados, in Jamaica, and they are still sitting on enormous wealth that has been accumulated over centuries of both that exploitation and then just like being able to hoard that wealth. I think they're in, I want to say somewhere in the southwest. It's also visible. All of their wealth is there, and that needs to be handed back. I think they might even still own land in Jamaica. It could be wrong, but irrespective, it's not that hard to put together a spreadsheet of what they own and then figure out how to redistribute that. Like, that is incumbent on somebody, and they have enough. They've got more wealth than they could spend in a lifetime. So that's the part that I don't understand, is like why anybody would want more than they need, and that, I suppose, is and growing and working with plants and being connected to the natural world really does embed that value system that you do not need to move through this world with more than you need. You do not need to accumulate so much wealth that you can't actually spend it in one lifetime, or even all of your children's and grandchildren's lifetime. Hopefully they'll be born if the planet is still here.
Coming back to the system is set up to make us believe there's a scarcity. Yes. And instead of that abundance that you've mentioned, and it's the greed, and it's that accumulation of greed and power and wealth, and it's a case of, and what comes from that scarcity mindset is like, I've got to make sure that I'm okay and stuff everyone else. And if it was flipped and it was abundance, it was because we are thinking about everybody. There's enough to go around for everybody. And I just need, my little much, not to the point of it just overflowing. And it's simple.
I understand the scarcity mindset if you are like living on the absolute, on a poverty line. But of course you've got to take care of yourself ultimately, because it's impossible it would be grotesque to ask somebody who is living with absolutely nothing to think about everybody else. What I don't understand is a scarcity mindset when you have enough to quite literally fund a small nation and you still have a scarcity mindset, and still that you have to accumulate it for you and yours, and only those with your surname. That's the scarcity mindset that just like it boggles my mind. It drives me bananas because it's unfathomable.
I apologize, Claire. I was giving them an excuse. I was offering them, a way out, right?
Yeah.
Having that scarcity mindset. But no, really, the reality is that you're greedy and you're just hoarding it.
Hey, they don't need excuses because they don't care.
Exactly.
We're here, having this conversation with each other, wanting desperately to redistribute their wealth, and they're just like, sitting on their piles of cash like Scrooge McDuck and just like laughing at us having our little conversations about how unjust it all is, because no one's holding them to account. The systems are set up so that they will consistently be able to consolidate their power and privilege and wealth. They don't care whether it's a scarcity mindset. We can diagnose them with all kinds of psychosis and they will just be like, tee-hee, but we don't even have to pay attention to you, and that's the problem, is that who are they actually accountable to? And they're just not part of our community. Yeah. And so we need to figure out how to take them down.
Well, that's it, never surrender, never give up, it's like, because, this is what we're working against, but we're still doing it.
Yeah. Each other though, don't we? Yeah. We do it for each other because we don't have, if we can afford not to have a scarcity mindset out of necessity, then we do it for each other. Yeah. And I don't think we're going to be able to convince the hyper super wealthy to engage in a reparations model. I mean, there are actually some people who are super wealthy who actually are trying to figure out how to be taxed more and actually make the argument that they should not have as much money as they do and then give it away, but they are few and far between. And so in absence of benevolent rich people, what do we then do? Then we have to create a movement that is about us and for us, and that's why we do it for each other, I think.
That's true. I'm checking the time, so just two things, and it's we've been talking about the present, so let's just hit back to the past and then a little bit to the future. It's like you mentioned that nature, plants wasn't part of your upbringing or your childhood. What is your background that way? Family. We said the immigrants, where did they come from? And let's pop to the future. It's like, what you got on the cards, man? What you got in the pot that's brewing?
Okay, well, so me and my family, we're from Mauritius, which is a small subtropical island off the coast of Madagascar. And it's a really interesting place, and I am continuously learning more and more about it. So allegedly an unpopulated island when it was discovered by the Portuguese, even though people have been using it as a kind of trading post, I think mostly kind of along the kind of Arab trading lines. So it was not necessarily unknown, but it was quote unquote discovered by the Portuguese first, and it is truly the product of colonialism and imperialism and the slave trade and indentureship. It was magicked up from all of those systems, because they say there were no native people there, and I think that it's possible that they were right, but we don't know that categorically. Obviously, we know that there was a lot of endemic species, including the very, very famous dodo, which is a perfect example of the ecological disaster that is colonialism, because we might all just be like, tee-hee, stupid bird, got eaten by all of those colonists. And I'd argue that actually it's much more complicated than that. And it was one of the first bits of true and deep evidence that colonialism is part of the pernicious part of the climate crisis. And that, it has been and still is an ecological disaster. Yes, so that's where I'm from. And my parents came here. They were recruited by the NHS. It's kind of a classic story, isn't it? They were part of the British Empire when they were born, and even I think Mauritius got its independence maybe a few years before they left, and they came and settled in leafy, boring Surrey. It was so I had a very suburban upbringing, and I was really, really bookish. So I just really was very uncomfortable in the outside world. I was very, very in the natural world. I was very uncomfortable in the outdoors. Found it all very itchy, scratchy, dirty. Didn't like it. So it was a real journey of homecoming to realize that those were just very powerful stories that needed to be dismantled. And that dirt is not the same as soil. And that was a beautiful recognition that actually I could be in this space and disrupting these ideas of what I should be doing and looking like and presenting myself as, and be happy, and sometimes I do over romanticize the food growing aspect. It's really hard work, especially if you're actually growing, if you're a food grower who grows and that's their livelihood. The food system is yet another thing that is deeply, deeply broken and deeply implicated in the climate crisis. So I've definitely moved through different waves of a loving relationship, because loving relationships are complicated, aren't they? A loving relationship with this work. So yeah, we it's been wonderful, revelatory, deeply, profoundly transformative, and so important, and also just like torturous and painful and really, really difficult. And I've had to kind of reorganize my life to look very, very different and to be very, very different, to make space for it. Quite a distinct pay cut, and have had to work in very weird and wonderful ways in order to make it happen. So I don't want to sort of play down the fact that there's also a privilege to being able to do the work in the way that I do it, in that I have the capacity, because of my previous career, because of the education that I've had, I'm able to pivot into doing other sustaining things like writing and talking, and there's a lot of about this work, and there's a lot of food growers who are grafting 6-7 days a week, and it is merciless. So yeah, always worth pointing that out, because I can tend to get a little misty-eyed about it, because now I only grow on a small scale for myself. It's very easy to just be talk about its delights, but I have suffered its trials also. And that's probably worth mentioning too. I've forgotten your second question. What was it? Was
like what you got brewing? Anything on the horizon that you'd like to share?
Okay, this news may or may not be out yet by then, but it's kind of an exclusive, only because I've been really secretive about it, but I've been working on a book. And so this whole last year has been me very, very deeply embedded in the writing process, which is why as at the beginning of our conversation I was like, I'm an exhausted, terrible mess, because that has been an deep and all-consuming process and has taken me to many places. Also writing during that winter lockdown, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone particularly, especially if they're kind of excavating some of their old wounding and trying to talk about what they're passionate about whilst also talking about pain. It's very hard. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. It hasn't been properly announced yet, so it's kind of an exclusive. I mean, if you search for it on the internet, it's not that hard to find. But
I like a little digging.
I haven't announced it to my world yet, because I just didn't want to. Some people are really happy to kind of announce their books before they've even done them. I think I knew that mine was going to ask a lot of me, and I really didn't want to be visible during that process. I didn't want anyone to say, "How's the book going?" when I was like crying into my laptop, which happened fairly regularly. So that is, I suppose, an exclusive.
So this sounds like it's, and I don't want to put a label on it, because it is what it becomes, isn't it? That's part of the process. But it sounds like it's memoir with nature in there, and the marrying of the two, and how that connection helped you, as we just said from the beginning, that healing those wounds. And
Exactly.
It's a hell of, I mean, I'm on that journey now. I'm doing my own mixed genre memoir, which is about my Black body with/in nature, and the pain and the joy that comes from that. But there's power, and there's growth and development about going through the process of writing that and trying to make it clear for ourselves first of all, and then to share our stories. So I'm so excited to hear that's in the pipeline. I really am, because it's like I'm on it. I'm on it like a carb on it, you know, because it is, it's such a joy and pleasure to talk to you. So many things that resonate, but so many things that you remind me and make me check myself about. And it's so hopeful and joy-filled and heart open to think that you're in the world doing what you're doing, you know. And I mean that from my heart, because it's like yay, it's like yay, we're doing it, we're coming for you, watch out.
Writing our stories, and like that's a huge part of that. It's just like, well, I mean, we know we exist, but the book, you know, if you look at the historical record, the books, you'd think that we weren't there sometimes, you know, especially Mauritius is particularly bad for this. The historical record is ill kept, erased, you know, deleted, burned, whatever. It doesn't really exist. And so it took me, it's been a hard slog trying to find my way back to those stories and those narratives, and then recognizing that a lot of those narratives are the victors' narratives, and trying to find us in the cracks, like, you know, which is where we always ended up, right? We always ended up in the margins, and we always ended up on the legal paperwork, or in our imaginations, in the bloodline, like in the heart. And that's what this process has been, is just trying to find where my actual ancestry dwells. And you know, those places have been erased and invisibilized and silenced for a long time. So my hope is that this book is at least it is a remedy for that, for me, and maybe it will be for others. I don't know. Maybe just no mum and dad.
yeah. Oh, beautiful. And you know, that just, it's like, it's all just like, there's that cycle, it's that spiral, coming back to that idea, you know, we've said about seeded power, and here we are talking about getting back to your origins and your roots, you know, like your ancestral roots, and how it's necessary, and it's all right to be doing it, being in the margins, and you still being in that outsider position. It's like, this is what we've got, or this is what we're taking, and this is what we're claiming, but we're actually turning it around and turning it into a position of power and beauty. And I just think it's awesome, amazing. So thank you.
I'm so excited to hear about your work too, because it sounds like you're doing something really similar.
Well, yeah, I am. It's just finding, I'm hopefully, you know, you mentioned about that lockdown winter and not to do the writing. Well, hope that's what, we're out of lockdown really, but like coming up in winter, I'm hibernating and I'm just getting it knocked out. I mean, I've got bits of it, but I need to have that focused time on it. And I think that's about giving myself permission. It's giving myself that permission to go deep and dive deep, and, you know, face what's around there and swirl around a bit more.
You can't dip in and out of that hard stuff, you know. You have to
I've been trying to just dip in and out.
It's so hard. If you're going to really go deep, you need to make like room for it to be a mess, honestly, and to feel like a mess, and to look like a mess, and then to kind of, because that's the thing that I think is so hard, that, you know, it's not, I mean, I have so much respect for anyone who has written a book, no matter what the subject matter, because it is such an undertaking. I keep coming back to, because it just genuinely, this process has somewhat terrorized me. Like, it's been really hard. But the thing that's hard is that, you know, you have these really complicated feelings, and so you have to move through those feelings, or like at least investigate and excavate those feelings, and then you have to be able to figure out how to articulate those. You're finding you have to try and figure out how to language all of that, and then you have to figure out how to fit it into a story, and it's so hard to do all of those things. Doing one of those things would be incredible. Having all the extra layers of trying to make that emotional experience both coherent and knowable, and using the right words that feel like they have integrity to what is the truth of what you're feeling, and then structuring it into a story, that's really difficult.
Yeah, man. But it is a hell of a journey, but it is worth it.
I think so. I hope so. I'm at a bit of a weird point in the journey where I feel like I could easily just crawl under a rock and stay there forever. So I'm hoping that this winter I'm going to kind of resource myself to face whatever book promo looks like come next year. So
Well, I'm excited. And, you know, you're saying crawling under that rock. You know, what's under the rock is not dirt, but soil.
Oh,
soil.
yeah.
Okay, so you'll be in your element.
Hibernation. It's a comfy place. That rock is safety. That rock is not like I'm not hiding because I'm afraid. Well, I'm a little bit afraid. I'm hiding because there's safety under that rock, and then I'm comfortable on the rock. Yeah. I'm at least 2 to 3 months under that rock, and then maybe I can come out a little bit of energy on the other side come spring.
Well, thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for your wisdom and share and heart that you brought to this episode. You are appreciated. So thank you kindly.
Thank you for asking me. It's such an honor and a pleasure. And you are just so delightful. I knew you would be. And this has been such a lovely conversation. I'm so glad that we found time for it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. And, you know, maybe once the book's out there, we can invite you back on to talk about that process. That was awesome.
You know, storytelling is so important, and I know, you know, I think it's not always available to everybody, and you know, to some extent, when you embark on a project like this, it's cathartic, therapeutic. It's something. It's processing. It's, you know, you're moving through stuff, and if doesn't feel available to you, then sometimes those feelings will just stay locked in. And you know, so I really want to encourage other people to, no matter whether you're writing a book is a whole shenanigan. That's not necessary unless you really want to. But I do really want to encourage more people to like embark on their own journey of storytelling, because we've been ignored for ages. I want to know your stories. I don't want to read the same stories over and over again. I've never been that into the classics.
Exactly.
Give me your stories. Tell me your history. Tell me the bit that they wanted to leave out. Don't let them leave it out.
Yeah.
You write it. I want to read it.
Yeah. There you go. Inspiring. Thank you, Claire. Thank you.